Good morning, this is Heather Hoffman, and today I have a couple cards to share with you using the beautiful Peony stamp set. It's got this gorgeous large bloom and lots of leaves and greenery. I'm going to use some pattern paper from two different 6x6 paper pads. Every little bit is where the orange one came from, and Winter Solstice is where the green one came from. These are older pattern paper pads. They're still available. You may notice the orange I've used for some previous die cutting. I always save the scraps so I can use them later, but I'm going to first, before I stamp my images, I'm die cutting all of the pieces out from my pattern paper, and then I'm going to do some ink blending around the outside with some coordinating reverse confetti dye ink. On that orange one I'm using rust dye ink, and then on the green ones I'm going to use some olive dye ink. And the reason I did it this way is if I'd stamped first, I would have had to leave a little bit of time for my stamped image to dry before I did the ink blending so that I wouldn't smudge my black ink. So this just kind of helps streamline the process a little bit. And I'll show you how I'm going to line up those die cut pieces in my negative die cuts here in a minute using my MISTI. And this is going to allow me to stamp after I've done the ink blending on there. So you notice off on the side, I still have my negative pieces of my die cuts that I've kept set aside and ready to use. So I'm going to start with the florals, and I'm going to pop that negative piece into my MISTI, and then I'm going to take my stamp image that coordinates with those die cut pieces and I'm going to line it up inside that negative space. That way I can make sure it's centered in there, and I'll pick it up with the lid of my MISTI, and then I can just set that die cut and inked piece in there. You can also see all that contrast on there from the inking and how much it changed the color of that pattern paper. I'm using Midnight dye ink to stamp these images on. It's nice and crisp and black, and as you can see, just with one stamp I'm getting a great impression, which is perfect for these. Alright, I'm going to do the exact same thing with the leaves there. I just trimmed off a little of the extra. I only needed one of the negative die cuts, and that way the piece will fit in my MISTI a little better, which will make it easier to stamp and line these up. So I'm starting with the big flower and just kind of moving down, stamping the image, and then pulling it off. You notice sometimes it sticks to the stamp, but it's easy just to peel it off carefully without smudging that. So just if it sticks in there, just make sure and carefully grab it and peel it off. All right, I skipped ahead a little bit there, finished up the last little bit of those. And I ended up doing, I wasn't sure how many of the leaves I'd want, so I ended up doing far more than I actually needed. So once I finished this video, I actually made another card. I stamped and cut out and inked two more flowers just in yellow from that same pattern paper that the orange paper came from, the Every Little Bit 6x6 paper pad. But coming back to this card, I quickly just laid out a design on a card base that I created using sand cardstock, and I decided to add some white paint splatters before I adhered that down. This is just white paint mixed with a little water that I keep in a little bottle, and I use a box to protect my work surface while I spray that on. Then I added foam adhesive to the back of that image. I picked that up with Press and Seal. That's one of my favorite Jennifer McGuire tricks, and it allowed me just to press everything back in place when I was done. All right, final finishing touch on this card. I grabbed my Sentimentally Yours stamp set, and I'm going to quickly choose a sentiment to add on there. Since I already have my white paint splatters, normally I would stamp my sentiment and then add the white paint splatters and mask it off, but I just picked a sentiment that I could fit around the white paint splatters. So if you have a certain sentiment in mind, I would suggest stamping it first, then you can mask it off and add your white paint splatters and keep that space clean to stamp your sentiment. Fortunately, I was able to make this one fit around and work the way I wanted anyway. Again, stamped with Midnight dye ink on there, and look at how bold and beautiful and fall that image looks. And then here's the one I did with the yellow, and you can see I used Bumblebee Dye Ink to ink that image, and you have a perfect set. It'd be fun to do it in lots of different colors as well. Thanks so much for coming by today. Have a wonderful day.